If you're frustrated about how long your 5th edition combats drag on for, then you're definitely not alone. Judging from the complaints I've seen in various corners of the internet, this issue is one of the biggest bugbears that DMs have about the system. The good news is that if you're new to this problem, there's already a lot of great advice out there on how to speed up your D&D combat, including on my own blog. I'll stick a link in the description. But ultimately, I feel there's only so much a more streamlined initiative system or using average monster damage can really do for you. So, before digging into tips that are realistically only going to save you a few seconds or minutes here and there, I think it'll be more revealing if we Dungeon Masters ask a couple of questions instead. Starting with, why does 5th edition combat take so long? I would argue that the main reason that 5e combat takes a long time is because players have a lot of meaningful choices to make on each of their turns. And when you try other, faster systems, that can become even more apparent. For example, I recently played in a one-shot of a popular fantasy RPG in which I played a dwarf Slayer-type barbarian. On my character sheet, I had a few special skills, all of which came online automatically in certain situations, so I didn't choose when to use them. And then for combat, I had a choice between using an axe or using a bigger axe. Once I worked out that the big axe was going to give me a higher damage output on average per round, despite being slightly harder to wield, I basically had 0 decisions to make in each of the fights we had during the adventure. Each round, I tried to roll and hit the nearest monster with my big axe. I still had fun, and it was actually a very atmospheric adventure, but the combat scenes were much less interesting than the D&D combats I'm used to playing with my Hobgoblin Swarmkeeper Ranger. With my 5e character, for example, I can choose to attack with 2 short swords, I can get out my longbow, or I can cast one of several different spells. In addition, I have a bunch of bonus action options through my Hobgoblin ancestry, and I get an interesting choice of swarm actions I can apply once per turn. So combat in my 5e game, where I'm a player, it feels really tactical. I'm often mixing up my actions round to round to try and have the biggest positive impact on the fight. Now, not every player or table wants combat to be a complex game within the game, but a lot, including myself, do. And the trade-off for the inclusion of that type of strategic decision-making and meaningful choices is that combat is going to take longer to run. Because players have a lot to think about, rules have to be looked up, and everyone wants to squeeze as much as they can into their turn. So the alternative, faster option is to play a lighter system that offers players less choices, less options to get bogged down in, or even a more narrative system that basically allows you to make up any cool stuff you could imagine your character doing, and then rolling a dice to see if it happens. These more narrative games can often lead to a lot of cinematic scenes at the table, to use a buzzword, but they can also feel a bit just like making up how you succeed, instead of earning a victory in a game with clearly delineated rules and an impartial referee. Another way of looking at the slow combat issue is, where do you and your players sit on the scale between wargamers and theatre kids? I'd suggest if you sit slightly right of centre, let's say, towards wargamers, but you don't really want to go fully simulation, then 5e is probably a good fit for your table. Another big question you can ask yourself before trying too hard to fix slow combat is, do your players think combat takes too long? Or is it just you? Because if your players enjoy combat more than the other pillars of play, then they're probably not bothered that half the session is taken up by the orc ambush. One thing I think a lot of DMs forget is that, yes, players have to spend a lot of time during combat waiting for their turn to do anything, but that's more or less true of the entire game, not just combat. It's just in combat their turn is clearly delineated, whereas in a social or exploration scene, they just have to wait until someone else stops talking and they can pipe up and say what their character is doing. So sometimes quieter players won't get a turn at all in a social or exploration scene because a more outspoken player drives the action and the quieter ones are left twiddling their thumbs in the backseat of the party mobile. So combat might be the one phase of the game where some players are guaranteed to act and make decisions. Remember too that players feel experience a combat, I should say, differently to the DM as well. A DM has a lot of behind-the-scenes info, which means they pretty much know when the fight is over and the party are definitely going to win. So for you, the DM, the tension might leave the fight and you might get bored, but the players don't know how many HP the boss has left, or what spells the orc shaman still has up their bone flute, or whether there's a second wave of marauders about to run out of the woods. And even if the players sense that the fight is probably won, they still don't want to take any more damage, and they still want the satisfaction of killing each and every single orc. So there's still stakes for them, and it's still a tense situation. If you, as the DM, do find yourself getting bored at the end of the fight, you could always inject some extra tension by having the dying shaman spit a curse at the players, and then perhaps rolling a dice behind your screen and cackling a bit. The players don't really need to know if there was a magic spell or not. Or introduce a bit of role-playing into the scene by having an orc beg for mercy, or just add some gritty flavour by describing how an orc spits out a bloody tooth and cuts his own throat instead of being taken alive. Those are just some ways I thought of that you can keep it interesting for yourself. So let's say you've considered the meaningful choices versus time taken trade-off, and that overall you're happy with 5e, but your combats still feel like a drag. Well, in that case, you might want to ask yourself question 3, which is, are your fights too long, or are they just too boring? If everyone is having fun, there's not really such a thing as too long a combat. So I would suggest that a good tactic would be to work on improving your combat design more than your combat speed, and avoid those boring slogs that can happen at the table. In my experience, boring fights are usually A, fights with low risks or low stakes, or B, fights where the smartest thing to do each round is the same thing everyone did on their last round, which leads to this repetitive slog and this kind of battle of attrition. We can label these undynamic fights. I could probably add C, fights which don't advance the storyline at all and just feel like a bit of a distraction. Random encounters can often trip all 3 of these red flags, particularly A and C, and that's why I personally don't use them much. But if you're playing a game that's about resource management, they have their purpose, and every combat has a stake in that sense. So those dungeon crawls have slightly different rules. I think advice on designing great D&D combats is going to be way too big a topic for this particular video, but it's something I've covered on my blog before in some detail, so if you want to delve deeper into that right now, I'll stick another link in the description. I will broadly say that great combat normally includes a variety of threats, including a ranged threat so that spellcasters and rogues can't feel safe, an interesting environment with hazards, cover and obstacles or effects, and maybe some additional context or story elements like hostages that need rescuing, an item that can't be allowed to get away, or the classic ritual that has to be stopped. A surprise development in the middle of a fight can also be the cherry on the cake of a really great combat. Your overall goal is to give players a reason to move around the battlefield and a sense of tension and urgency, so that the fight just doesn't become a static grinding down of each other's hit points. Okay, I hope this video helped you think about and possibly reframe the problem of slow combat in 5th edition, and hopefully help you make some small improvements to your table. I'd love to know your thoughts on the topic in the comments, and if I missed something, or if you have a different take entirely, that's just as welcome. That's it from me, so until next time, let's keep rolling. Oh, one more thing. If you're curious about the dice that features in the cover art of of this video, it's a Fizban's Fortune. Well, I'm not holding that up very well. It's a Fizban's Fortune mystery box. Fanroll sent me this one very generously. And yeah, you don't know what dice you're getting. It's always a surprise. I think this is a Shadow Dragon, which is quite nice. It's an oversized D20, which makes it feel a bit more serious. And you saw it's got the official D&D ampersand in place of the number 20. So yeah, it just sits in here. Well, gets used on the table, but it comes in the box. I'll stick a link in the description. Famroll given me a 10% discount that anyone can use. So yeah, go wild. Okay, until next time, guys.